Imagine living in a world where someone confidently tells a pilot how airplanes should work while flying in one. That's the level of delusion we're dealing with here. And trust me, if that sounds unbelievable, you haven't heard the really impressive ones yet. 1. A woman once informed a seasoned meteorologist, an actual scientist with degrees, radar data, and a wall of monitors glowing like NASA mission control. That rain is just God crying because people misbehaved, and therefore weather forecasts should include moral explanations. She wasn't joking. She said forecasts should list who upset him so people could plan their days responsibly. The meteorologist, whose job already includes explaining to adults why tornadoes don't have on-off switches, had to calmly clarify that atmospheric moisture doesn't track human wrongdoing. She stood her ground, insisting thunderstorms were basically divine spanking sessions and that predicting them without identifying the culprits was unprofessional. It's a miracle the meteorologist didn't just unplug the entire department and walk into the sunset, because nothing prepares you for a grown adult demanding a sin-based precipitation index. 2. A man with a raging toothache marched into a dentist's office and confidently declared he didn't need x-rays because he already knew the problem. According to him, his tooth hurt because the Wi-Fi router in his apartment was vibrating his bones. Not his gums, not his nerves, his bones. The dentist tried explaining anatomy and physics, gently pointing out that Wi-Fi signals don't cause dental percussion, but the man was ready with the kind of logic that makes chiropractors weep. He said, "Actually, I feel it more when I walk past the modem." He demanded the dentist write a medical note to his landlord stating that Wi-Fi is chipping his teeth from the inside. The fact that the dentist didn't schedule an emergency extraction of the man's internet access is proof that healthcare workers deserve bonus pay simply for not laughing in people's faces. 3. At an auto shop, a customer insisted her car was making a weird whirring noise because of climate change, which she claimed was affecting the metal's emotional stability. The mechanic tried steering her toward reality by explaining that engines don't have feelings, and temperature shifts affect materials in normal, predictable ways. But she doubled down, arguing that her Honda was anxious because she drove past a protest earlier that week. When the mechanic gently diagnosed a failing alternator, she rejected it on the grounds that machines are like pets. They act out when society is stressed. She left the shop planning to play calming music for her dashboard. Somewhere, an alternator died waiting for its therapy session. 4. A barista once had to explain to a man that coffee beans do not grow pre-flavored. The man insisted his vanilla latte should be cheaper because vanilla beans and coffee beans come from the same plant, so it's basically one ingredient. When the barista clarified that vanilla and coffee are entirely different crops grown in different climates, the man responded with the confidence of a TED Talk speaker who forgot to do research. He said, "Plants share flavors. That's why apples taste like grapes sometimes." They do not. Nothing about botany supported the argument, but he continued lecturing the barista about the agricultural economy until he reached the register, where he finally paid full price, but left muttering that farmers were hiding the truth about the vanilla coffee conspiracy. The barista deserved hazard pay for exposure to raw, unfiltered confidence. 5. A pharmacist encountered a person who insisted that dissolvable medication strips were witchcraft because they disappeared in the mouth without being swallowed. The pharmacist patiently explained how dissolvable delivery systems work, but the customer shook their head like they'd just uncovered a major scandal. They claimed the strips were pulling a chemical vanishing act and demanded a version that stayed solid to prove it's real medicine. They even suggested the pharmacist file a complaint with the FDA or whoever monitors illusions. The pharmacist tried to reassure them, but the customer departed muttering that modern medicine was turning into stage magic, as if pharmacists spend their lunch breaks practicing sleight of hand. 6. A librarian once had to explain to a man that the Dewey Decimal System is not political propaganda. The customer claimed the library was silencing alternative viewpoints because books on conspiracy theories weren't in the same aisle as physics. The librarian began the patient, saintly explanation of how categories work, but the man argued that true knowledge shouldn't be sorted, and demanded the library adopt a system where books were arranged by how surprising they are. When told that the library would not be reorganizing into chaos incarnate, he accused the librarian of being part of the information cartel. Imagine being so dedicated to confusion that an entire cataloging system feels like a personal attack. 7. A gym trainer listened as a client insisted that stretching makes muscles too loose, causing them to spill into the bloodstream. The trainer tried to clarify that muscles are neither liquid nor prone to migrating like confused jellyfish, but the client interrupted with absolute conviction. They claimed they once stretched after a jog and felt something moving around inside, which they assumed was a bicep drifting away from its home. When the trainer explained anatomy for the third time, the client announced they would only do stiffness-based training from now on. Somewhere, every biology teacher from their past spontaneously sighed. 8. A flight attendant was informed by a passenger that turbulence could be avoided if pilots just drove around it like potholes. When the attendant explained that air isn't a flat road but a dynamic fluid environment, the passenger shook his head sympathetically, like the attendant was the one who didn't get it. He said, "They can see clouds, right? Just go the other way." When told that turbulence doesn't always come from clouds, he concluded the airline was too lazy to steer more. This man believed pilots, people who operate multi-ton sky machines in 3 dimensions, are basically inattentive Uber drivers ignoring simpler routes. 9. A tech support agent endured a customer furious that their laptop kept overheating, only to discover the user had stuffed the vents with tissue paper to keep dust out. When the agent explained that airflow is required for survival and overheating happens when ventilation is blocked, the customer balked. They insisted computers should be designed to breathe through the keyboard instead and accused the tech company of flawed lung placement. They demanded a refund for respiratory failure. It's a miracle the laptop lasted long enough to file a complaint. 10. A veterinarian once had to explain to an owner that cats cannot be vegan because they're judgmental, not herbivores. The owner insisted that their cat's refusal to eat tofu meant the cat wasn't spiritually ready. The vet tried to break the news gently. Cats are obligate carnivores, meaning they need meat to survive. The owner countered by saying their cat's true self is probably plant-based and accused the vet of pushing big meat propaganda. The vet recommended an appropriate diet, but the owner requested a compromise meal plan that respects the cat's personal values. The only thing the cat valued was escaping the conversation. 11. A plumber encountered a homeowner convinced their pipes were clogged because the house is retrograding. Not the plumbing, the house. They believed Mercury's position relative to their zodiac sign was causing water to move emotionally slower. The plumber attempted to redirect the conversation to reality, pointing at literal hair and grease blocking the drain. The homeowner remained unmoved, insisting the blockage was symbolic buildup. It took an industrial snake to clear the mess, and all the self-control the plumber had to avoid suggesting therapy, for the homeowner, not the pipes. 12. A teacher was informed by a parent that their child should be excused from math homework because numbers are optional now, and modern children operate on vibes. The teacher attempted to explain the basics of education, but the parent insisted their child was more intuitive than numeric and that arithmetic might limit their creativity. When the teacher noted that basic math is required to function in the world, the parent said, "That's what calculators are for," as if calculators spring fully formed from trees and require no human understanding. The teacher deserved an honorary PhD in patience. 13. A nutritionist listened to a man insist that drinking 8 glasses of water a day is dangerous because water expands when it's inside the body. He believed the human stomach would inflate like a balloon and put pressure on his organs, eventually squeezing the lungs upward. The nutritionist tried to explain hydration, digestion, and the fact that humans are not inflatable pool toys, but the man waved it off, saying he drinks just enough to moisten the tongue. Somewhere, kidneys fainted in distress. 14. An architect was cornered by a homeowner who demanded their new house be built at a slight tilt, so positive energy flows downhill. When the architect explained structural integrity, gravity, and the part where slanted houses become lawsuits, the homeowner claimed the architect lacked imagination. They said they saw a video online proving sloped floors stimulate creativity and wanted their children to grow up thinking diagonally. The architect gently suggested using art supplies instead of breaking physics. The homeowner left disappointed, presumably to find a contractor with a higher tolerance for nonsense. 15. A surgeon was asked by a patient whether anesthesia could be skipped because they wanted to stay alert in case something inspiring happened during the operation. The surgeon explained pain, trauma, shock, and the body's tendency to object violently to being sliced open. The patient argued that their mindset is strong enough to override discomfort, comparing surgery to holding a plank for a long time. The surgeon, who had no desire to perform medieval medicine, insisted on anesthesia. The patient eventually agreed, but requested the surgeon narrate the procedure for creative purposes. The surgeon politely declined, likely to prevent the patient from turning medical science into a podcast episode. 16. A professional baker once had a customer insist that bread only rises because bakers whisper secrets to the dough, and therefore the baguette she'd bought was defective because it didn't feel emotionally uplifted. The baker, who relied on yeast and chemistry rather than spiritual pep talks, explained fermentation, temperature, and gluten structure. She responded with the sort of confidence usually reserved for self-help influencers in front of ring lights and said, "No, I've seen videos. The dough absorbs your energy." She even complained that her loaf tasted unmotivated, implying it needed a therapy session more than butter. When the baker reminded her that bread does not, in fact, experience existential dread, the woman demanded a refund on moral grounds, proving that some people genuinely believe carbohydrates require emotional validation. 17. A seasoned electrician was once informed by a homeowner that light bulbs last longer if you yell at them once a week so they know you're in charge. The homeowner said it with such earnest authority that the electrician had to pause and mentally reboot. He tried explaining voltage, filaments, and the known scientific shortage of dominance-based illumination strategies. The homeowner wasn't having it. He insisted electricity behaves like a stubborn teenager and needs firm discipline. He even bragged that he once scolded a flickering lamp and it straightened up immediately, as though lamps respond to strict parenting. The electrician fixed the wiring and left, silently hoping future generations inherit a working understanding of cause and effect instead of parenting methods for light fixtures. 18. A dermatologist once listened to a man who believed sunscreen was a government plot to block natural sun nutrients from entering the skin. He said this while burned so severely he looked like an audition tape for Human Lobster the musical. The dermatologist tried to explain ultraviolet radiation, melanin, and the glaring medical consensus that sunscreen prevents skin cancer, not personal enlightenment. But the man rejected all of it, insisting the sun feeds your cells motivation and lotion interferes with solar inspiration. He even requested a cream that would let the nourishing rays in but keep the harmful ones out, which is essentially describing sunscreen, the very thing he refused to use. Modern medicine survived the conversation, but just barely. 19. A seasoned accountant had a client who demanded their tax return include emotional deductions, claiming their job hurt their feelings enough to qualify as a financial hardship. The accountant explained repeatedly that the IRS does not offer rebates for existential dread. The client argued back with the boldness of someone who clearly has never met a tax auditor, insisting their stress should be considered a loss of internal productivity assets. When the accountant refused to commit tax fraud under the banner of emotional wellness, the client pouted and suggested the IRS update their policies to be more supportive of sensitive taxpayers. If accountants had a punch card for every time someone proposed reinventing federal law to accommodate vibes, this one would have earned a free vacation. 20. A firefighter once had to politely correct someone who claimed smoke was just spicy air, and therefore didn't understand why people needed to evacuate a burning building. They weren't being funny. They genuinely thought fire was basically an inconvenient seasoning drifting through the environment. The firefighter explained combustion, toxicity, oxygen displacement, all the fun ways smoke kills you. The individual stared as though processing a surprising twist in a soap opera and said, "Well, it never bothered me at barbecues." The firefighter exercised heroic self-control by not pointing out the difference between a grill and a structural inferno. It's shocking how often survival depends on firefighters being both brave and excellent at explaining obvious things gently. 21. A paramedic once encountered someone who believed CPR was optional during a cardiac emergency because if the heart stops, maybe it just needs a break. The paramedic calmly explained that the human heart is not a retail employee clocking out for lunch, and pauses in cardiac activity are generally frowned upon by the entire medical community. Still, the bystander insisted that bodies self-correct when they're ready, and suggested they wait for the person to reboot naturally. The paramedic proceeded with CPR anyway because, unlike computer software, humans don't have a recovery mode accessed by waiting patiently. It's a miracle emergency medical services don't hand out pamphlets titled, "No, seriously, you can't just hope people restart." 22. A real estate agent once had a buyer ask whether the square footage of a house changes depending on the season because wood expands when it's humid. They were convinced the home should be listed at one size in winter and another in summer, like some kind of architectural werewolf. The agent, balancing professionalism with inner disbelief, explained that although materials shift slightly, real estate does not moonlight as an accordion. The buyer argued that homes should reflect their natural cycles and suggested charging more during peak expansion months. The agent walked them through the standardized measurement process, but the buyer continued treating the house like a living organism experiencing growth spurts. One can only imagine the appraisal chaos if this idea ever caught on. 23. A veterinary technician once dealt with a man convinced his dog was malfunctioning because it slept more than he did. He insisted the dog needed a system update, possibly administered through vitamins or tapping its head like resetting a remote. The technician explained that dogs sleep far more than humans because they're biologically supposed to, not because they're running outdated software. The man, unimpressed by facts, claimed his dog lacked initiative and asked whether there was a supplement to make pets hustle harder. The tech recommended more playtime and enrichment, but the man left muttering about productivity tools for pets, as though his golden retriever needed a morning routine video and a planner. 24. A seasoned hairstylist had a client declare that hair grows faster if you cut it during a full moon while standing near water. The client cited ancient wisdom collected from YouTube influencers who specialize in mystical nonsense and candle sponsorships. The hairstylist gently explained biological growth cycles, genetics, and the generally moon-independent nature of keratin. The client wasn't convinced. They insisted the salon should offer lunar appointments for premium pricing, because the hair knows. The stylist, who had already heard every myth about trims encouraging growth, simply nodded and delivered a normal haircut, one that grew exactly as fast as science predicted. Lunar tides be damned. 25. A pediatric nurse once faced a parent who demanded the hospital measure their child's height without involving numbers, because numbers create limiting labels. The nurse, admirably calm, explained that height requires measurement, and measurement requires, unfortunately, numbers. The parent suggested interpretive descriptions, such as tallish with upward potential. The nurse explained medical charts do not support poetic approaches to growth data. The parent sighed dramatically, saying quantifying height was suppressive. Meanwhile, the child, who understood numbers perfectly, started reciting them out loud just to spite the entire conversation. The nurse documented the actual height, numbers and all, and the world continued spinning. 26. An IT specialist once listened to someone explain that their computer kept crashing because it absorbed negative emotions from the household. The specialist opened the device to find dust, overheating, and a hard drive begging for retirement. But the person insisted emotional toxicity was the root cause. They even asked whether the specialist could sage the motherboard. The IT worker suggested proper ventilation and backing up files, which the customer interpreted as a metaphor instead of literal advice. It's a wonder the computer didn't file for emotional support of its own. 27. A horticulturist had a visitor complain that their plant wasn't blooming because it was shy and needed verbal encouragement before exposing its petals. The expert explained that light, water, and nutrients, not compliments, trigger flowering. The visitor nodded as if hearing a bedtime story and insisted the plant simply wasn't ready to open up emotionally. They asked if the horticulturist could recommend confidence-building fertilizers. The horticulturist suggested adjusting sunlight exposure, but the visitor left believing they had a timid ficus in need of motivational podcasts. The plant bloomed later anyway, presumably out of sheer exhaustion. 28. A police dispatcher once received a call from someone requesting an officer because their neighbor looked suspiciously taller than usual, which they believed indicated possible shape-shifting. The dispatcher, who is paid to maintain composure even when humanity tests it aggressively, explained that height differences are not grounds for emergency response. The caller insisted humans don't change height unless they're up to something, after clarifying repeatedly that shape-shifting is not a recognized crime category. The dispatcher redirected the caller to more appropriate uses of 911, such as anything else. 29. A museum curator once dealt with a patron who insisted dinosaur fossils were too convenient and clearly planted by archaeologists to boost tourism. The curator explained geological timescales, fossilization, and the lack of a global skeleton-burying conspiracy. The patron argued that no one has ever seen a dinosaur in real life, so how do we know they weren't invented for merch sales? The curator resisted the urge to hand them a paleontology textbook as a bludgeon and instead guided them to educational materials, which the patron skimmed before concluding, "I'll wait for the documentary." Some people treat science like a menu. They only pick the parts that fit their appetite. 30. A professional tailor once had a client insist their clothing measurements must be incorrect because numbers shouldn't change once you're an adult. The tailor explained that bodies fluctuate for countless reasons: diet, activity, gravity doing its relentless daily crimes. But the client insisted their size was fixed by destiny. They argued the tape measure must be gaslighting them. The tailor remeasured, got the exact same numbers, and the client frowned like the universe had personally betrayed them. Reality did not adjust to accommodate their feelings, but the tailor did adjust the seams. 31. A park ranger once had to explain to a visitor that bears do not schedule their appearances and therefore cannot be reserved for a photo op. The visitor insisted that customer experience matters and asked whether the ranger could at least text one of them to swing by. The ranger explained wildlife does not take bookings, accept tips, or respond to scheduling requests. The visitor argued that at the very least, the bears should patrol specific routes for consistency, essentially suggesting the national park operate like a theme park with roaming mascots. The ranger, exercising the patience of a saint, offered safer viewing suggestions while silently hoping the visitor never meets an actual bear, which, unlike the staff, has absolutely no interest in customer satisfaction. Humanity really outdid itself, and somehow we're all still functioning. Drop your own favorite disaster in the comments, vote on the dumbest one, and stick around. There's always more chaos coming.